Hello and welcome to Unprofessional Engineering. My name is James.
And you got Luke.
Luke, we're doing a write-in today, looking at yet another amazing plane that has been created over the years, the Concorde.
So first question, how old is this write-in?
So it was recent, but I think someone else has written in with it many moons ago.
Okay.
So somewhere between a couple weeks and a few years we'll go with.
That, just making sure to be clear that like when you write in, we respond. That's what we're essentially saying.
Oh, there's so many that I'm like, yeah. But I always blame it on you. I'm always like, if Luke approves this one, then we'll get it added in there. So
I am not the approval method.
Yeah, no, not at all. All right, the Concorde. Pretty interesting stuff, it turns out.
I think you're pronouncing it wrong. I think it's Concorde. I mean, we'll go with Concorde for today.
Okay, but otherwise,
I think
someone could write in and tell us how we actually
should be
pronouncing it. It is, well, yeah, funny how that goes in, and we'll get into that here in a little bit, huh? Tell me about it. What was it?
So this was the very first supersonic commercial airliner that was ever built. And so if you think about it, so supersonic flight, it happens every day with like military flights, right? But when you take like 100 or whatever the seating capacity is, I never grabbed that number for some reason.
You don't know the seating capacity?
It was like 100 and some. It wasn't big because it was a narrow plane, which we'll get into the details. But it was the first supersonic airplane, commercial airliner ever produced. There were a total of 20 aircrafts that were ever produced. 14 of them actually entered service.
There you go. Yeah.
With British Airways and Air France. So on March 2nd, on March 2nd, 1969, Concorde 001 flew into history with its maiden flight. It was the first supersonic transcontinental crossing, and it went from Paris to Washington, D.C. It also went to Rio de Janeiro. It went to Miami, Caracas, Bahrain. Eventually, because of cost overruns and all the shenanigans, and if you think of like the people that could afford these flights, because they were pretty crazy. We'll get into that in a minute.
Keep in mind, there weren't podcasts back then, so not a lot of people could afford this.
Not a lot of people had podcast money, but it eventually just went from New York to Paris. And
what was interesting about that too, though, was like a lot of it had to do with noise pollution as well. Like everyone was so angry about how much noise these suckers made.
Well, that's why they couldn't
the sound barrier.
They couldn't fly across. Like that's why you very rarely would see them flying across land. Like it was always across the Atlantic, and that was it for the most part.
Right.
Interestingly, the plane itself still to this day is the only supersonic. I mean, this thing like 1969, and there's never been a second supersonic commercial, like the closest. So it could go from New York to Paris in 3 hours, something like that, somewhere in that neighborhood.
New York to London in like 3 hours.
Crazy fast. Like the fastest today is like 9 or something.
Oh, it takes so long. What a terrible flight.
So the fact that in 1969 you could cross the Atlantic in 3 hours, and now it takes like 9 or 10 hours, depending on headwinds.
I don't think that's the number, but yeah, it still takes a lot longer.
Yeah, a lot longer.
Yeah.
So
it's miserable. A few things that I thought were interesting. Well, one, like really, Rio is where you're gonna go from Paris? Like
party people, right? I don't know.
Is that a thing? I've never been to Rio. I don't know. Maybe it's a big destination, but I was really surprised to see that. I didn't even know where Senegal was, so I had to Google machine that one and figure it out. So appreciated learning that. But can I back things up a little bit? I know you were throwing a bunch of like
we got to do some histories for sure.
Gosh, if there wasn't history, I would have nothing to talk about.
I know.
So this is the part that I thought was actually interesting, was not really the building of the plane, which is terrible considering that's what we're supposed to care about as very good engineers, but like the espionage and the country politics and whatnot. So November 29th, 1962, so well before the first flight of the Concorde, or what was it, Concorde?
Concorde.
Either way, November 29th, 1962, Britain and France sign a treaty to share the costs and risks in producing this fancy new plane. So I guess it was like British Aerospace and the French firm Aerospatiale. Is that pretty good?
Yeah, you got it.
So they were going to be the ones controlling like the airplane, we'll say, like the airframe, and then Rolls-Royce, and then some giant name from France were going to be the ones that were working on the jet engines because they needed something completely new and fancy and different to be flying these suckers. The next year, JFK over here in America is like, we need to do this too because this is a super awesome idea. We got to fly really fast. And then over in the USSR, they were ordered to do the same thing to compete with America and Europe to be able to do this. So America had the Boeing 2707, which actually never made it past the drawing board. Super expensive, a whole lot of technical problems that they couldn't overcome real easily. They gave up on it really quickly. And then the Soviets made the Tu-144, the Tupolev Tu-144, which is really interesting. And I'll get into more of what happened with that. But I didn't realize there was something else. Like there was the Concorde, and that's all we know about. But the Soviets kind of did it as well.
Okay,
so
gotcha.
Before I go on, was there something else you want to add in here? Because I just have a rambling history here, which is amazing.
No, not specific. I'll interject. I have a few dates, but I'll let you ramble.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So the first part that I want to ramble about are the engines. So the engines themselves, super crazy challenge for everyone to overcome, right? They would have to be twice as powerful as normal jet engines that were being used in planes. Eventually, they went with the Rolls-Royce option. That's why I didn't even bother with the other company's name. It was the Olympus 593 turbojet. Each one of these engines could produce 38,000 pounds of thrust. The aircraft had 4 engines, and it took advantage of what they called reheat technology. So that was like the fancy tech that they were using. So this was adding fuel at the final stage of the engine, which produced the extra power required for takeoff and the transition into supersonic flight. They were so, fun fact for you, Luke, they were so powerful that during taxiing, the plane would basically be out of control if they used all 4 of them. So they were only able to turn on 2 of the engines so that they could help with like actually controlling the plane to get it where it needed to go.
That makes sense.
And so because of all of this, the aircraft's frame also had to withstand crazy amounts of pressure from the shock waves, as well as endure high temperatures from air friction, which sounds strikingly familiar to our SR-71 episode, doesn't it?
It's very familiar, but I think they went a different direction. I don't know if we're going to talk, we'll talk specifically later about some design challenges, I think, but I think they went a slightly different direction. So
they did go into a different direction. And before we get into anything such as that, I think it's time for us to take a break for a word from our sponsor.
Air France, thank you very much.
No, this time.
Okay.
I forgot to reach out, so this one's on me.
Gotcha.
We don't have any sponsor this episode, but we do have some shout outs, which is even
got?
better. First, we have Yo-Yo S. I'm Yo-Yo from Hong Kong, and now I'm in the United States as an exchange student. So welcome, Yo-Yo. I just started to listen to your podcast, and I love it so much. Thank you for doing this podcast. I'm interested in engineering, but in my country, engineering is not a popular major in university. I would like to hear more about automation engineering. Do an episode on that or else. He didn't say that part. But I thought that was a very nice write-in, and I think it's really interesting that engineering isn't so big in Hong Kong.
It's weird how you would think, like, depending on where you live or what country you're from, like the popularity of a major would make a difference.
Yeah, I agree. I said, welcome to America. Hope all's going well. And to be fair, you've already found the best thing that America produces in the Unprofessional Engineering podcast. So you probably can go home happy now. So,
of course.
Good. Second write-in is from Drew I. I just graduated with my bachelor's in civil engineering in May, and I've been... They were nice enough to write in. And I have been working in the transportation sector designing roads. I love listening to the podcast on my commute, and I would love hearing some episodes about, quote, concrete, asphalt, and road design in general. And then interesting info here. In your wacky units of measure, you mentioned chains and links. Those were used primarily by surveyors who were defining people's property corners. It isn't the most well-known part of engineering, and it isn't the most technical, but it is certainly important. So, Drew, thank you for that fun fact sort of information.
I do think like the asphalt, concrete, like road types, because I don't know about you, but you know, we both live in Pittsburgh and the roads are terrible. Like, I mean, we can send people to the moon, but we can't like devise a material for roads that can hold up to like winters. That's bananas to me.
Wasn't there some big Pittsburgh scandal that like we went with some really cheap crapo asphalt or something,
sure
and that like really hosed us down the road? I don't remember,
sure.
But yeah. Well, if any of you know anything about Pittsburgh's roads, if you want to write in and say hello, if you want to tell us about your experience in America, if you want to suggest some episodes, anything like that, why don't you go ahead and email us at unprofessionalengineering@gmail.com.
Or if you'd like to check out our YouTube channel and see my sweet mustache that I'm sporting right now, I would encourage all of you, even if you never watch on YouTube, just go to YouTube just for this one episode. Check out my stash because my wife is not happy with it. It's coming off tonight. And don't forget to like, subscribe, review. We love to hear the reviews. And as always, you can tell your smart devices to play the Unprofessional Engineering Podcast.
Luke, I am sorry she does not love your mustache, but I do. Everything about it, every last hair I love on your mustache. Back at it, Luke. Fun fact for you.
Shoot.
In 1965, the French arrested Sergei Pavlov, head of the Paris office of the Soviet airliner Aeroflot, for illegally obtaining classified info about France's supersonic project. Another high-level Soviet spy remained unknown. However, they continued to feed info to the Soviets somehow about the Concorde, of course, until this person got arrested in 1977. So that's another like 12 years until this person got arrested. So on December 31st of 1968, just 3 months before the scheduled flight of the Concorde prototype, the Soviets' espionage paid off for them, and they revealed the Tu-144, the world's first supersonic airliner. The aircraft looked so much like the Concorde that the Western press dubbed it the Concordiski. So pretty good. Russia just totally stole the Concorde, and then not Russia, I'm sorry, the Soviet Union stole it and created their own supersonic jet.
So, but was theirs a commercial airliner for and it went
I believe so.
I must have missed that somehow.
Yeah. So do you want more info on that? Because it's fascinating.
I would love
it.
You
have something.
No, I'm good. I just want to make sure that we get to some of the design stuff.
Go ahead. Let's talk about design.
So who doesn't love a droopy nose?
I do.
Right? I love a droopy nose. So one of the things about the Concorde is it had what was called a droop nose design. So when you would see this thing parked in a lot of the pictures, while it was on the ground and taking off and taxiing and landing, it looked like it was broken almost. The very front of it was tilted down about 5 degrees or so, I think was the angle. And the reason why they did that was when this thing was supersonic, it had to be like so super aerodynamic that the pilots cannot see out of the front windows because the nose is in the way, just with the way the design was created. So when they're in flight, that's okay. They're using instruments to navigate. But whenever they're driving around and taxiing and landing, they need to be able to see. So what the droop nose enabled them to do was internally, they could hit a switch. It would drop the nose 5 degrees. They could see where they were taxiing and landing. But it could only be deployed at like certain speeds. If they were too high, it would totally mess up the aerodynamics. But it was one of the most iconic looking things. It's a terrible name, Droop Nose, but apparently a lot of supersonic planes, like smaller planes, have the same design. Like if you look at older military aircraft, and again, when they're supersonic, the nose needs to be up and obstructs the view of the pilot. So it's actually a pretty common thing, not just on the Concorde.
That is interesting.
Design challenge.
I don't like it.
Number 2, heating.
Number 2.
So aerodynamic
Keeping
heating.
people warm inside?
Yeah. So apparently the walls would get warm. And like all the surfaces would be warm on the inside. So they had major heating problems they had to basically engineer around. So, and that's caused by aerodynamic heating. And that's essentially the friction of the air passing over the body of the aircraft. And they actually had to use a really special aluminum alloy throughout the plane. So it wasn't the same material, because we still don't know what made up the Blackbird, because they won't tell us. Go figure. But yeah, they had to use a super special aluminum alloy, and they could only travel at the maximum Mach speed for like 2 minutes at a time or something like that, to reduce the heat on the plane. The nose obviously was the hottest point. So major heating problems. And then the third one that I have some info on is structural issues. So go figure, maneuvering at hypersonic speeds puts a little stress on an airplane. So the design of the plane is called a delta wing. And if you look at the shape of the plane, it's a very long tapering triangle, essentially. And what it's meant for is to reduce surface area. It had far fewer ailerons, I think they're called, the things that adjust your pitch and yaw and all those. Normally there's like 20 or 30 of those on an airplane. They had like 6 or something like that, because at those speeds you can only make super slight adjustments, and anytime those adjustments would happen at supersonic speeds, tons of stress would just travel through the aircraft's body. So again, they had to tackle major structural issues during the design and development process.
I have some questions for you.
Go ahead, shoot.
Do you think the band Semisonic was encouraged by supersonic speeds?
Yes. And fun. Yes. And I have one.
I know where you're going. Go ahead.
The band Flight of the Condor, fact, Concorde, his father was a pilot. That's where the name came from. Go.
I heard that he had a dream as well about some craziness that also encouraged the name or inspired the name. Did you ever play Street Fighter when you were a kid growing up?
I vaguely remember. Yeah.
There was one of the guys who did this fancy kick with this flash, and he'd shout "Sonic Boom" every time he did it. That was my brother's favorite character. If any of you used him, he had very nice hair. I wonder if he had a Concorde in the back. No, he probably had an SR-71. That makes more sense.
Probably did.
Okay, more stuff that you want to go over here, Luke?
That's all I had in the design, unless you had some other specific stuff. I just wanted to tackle the major design challenges.
Those were the major design challenges. I don't have a ton more on that, just some fun facts and some other stats about it. But before we get into those, maybe we take a break for this week's Luke's Rant.
All righty. So this rant is close to a home, I guess, because we're talking about airline stuff. So we're getting back to travel now, James, and not ish. So I'm planning a flight with my family for early next year.
That's a mistake.
And I had my mother and my sister flew out to Utah not all that long ago, and it is amazing to me the shenanigans that some of these people get themselves into on flights. Like every day in the news, you hear about someone getting kicked off. They're not wearing a mask. They're assaulting an airline pilot or attendant or whoever it happens to be. It's so air travel. Just keep this in mind, folks. Air travel, this is literally human beings in air flying to a location. This is a miracle of science and engineering. It's literally magic. I don't understand it completely. And I really think that whenever you decide to participate in something that is that magical, literally like a bird flying through the sky while you sit in a chair, you need to kind of put like your big girl and big boy pants on and just behave yourself. There's rules for a reason. It's literally, a couple of hours of your day. You watch a few episodes of, Ted Lasso or Game of Thrones or whatever, and the flight's over. Just because, so my mother and my sister are on a flight, and it didn't get delayed, but they had to kick somebody off of the flight. And it wasn't
awesome.
like one of those big like video things, but like it like the person ended up getting off. It's like, really? So it makes me not want to fly if I know that I'm going to run into all these shenanigans with these people in flights. So just behave yourselves, people. It's magic. It's a bit of a privilege, in my opinion, to be able to do that, because we could be on the back of a horse riding across the country, right?
No,
Just
thank
saying.
you. I think that's a great call out, Luke. Would these people be considering assaulting Harry Potter if he was flying them on the back of his broom?
Probably not.
Is it a firebolt? Is that what it is?
I think
it is.
Something.
I think it's a firebolt. Yeah, so stop beating up airline employees. Yeah. I like when people get duct taped to their chairs, though. I think that's funny every time I see it.
I've seen a picture or two.
Oh, my goodness. All right. Can I go back to history a little bit?
Oh, of course.
I
know you love your histories.
73, the Tu-144 comes to the west, Luke, and it appears alongside the Concorde at the Paris Air Show. Still the biggest air show in the world, I do believe. On June 3rd.
Catalina wine mixer. Don't forget.
Oh, from
the largest helicopter leasing.
Yes.
Event
what is it? Step Brothers? Is that it? Oh, thank you for that. June 3rd, 200,000 spectators watch the Concorde fly a flawless demonstration. You can guess what's coming next year, Luke. Because then the Soviets turn. The aircraft made a successful 360-degree turn. Abruptly, it leveled and began a sharp descent about 1,500 feet above the ground. It broke up from overstress and came crashing to the ground, killing 6 members of the crew and 8 civilians. It gets worse, though, and more interesting. It turns out that there was a French plane taking pictures of this thing from above, which likely threw off everything, causing the pilot to level off quickly and causing this whole problem. But the two countries agreed to a giant cover-up so that the Russians wouldn't, or the Soviets wouldn't get bad press, and France wouldn't say that it's a crappy design. They all agreed not to mention that this plane was taking pictures from above and possibly caused this crash. Eventually, Western Europe wins, of course, with the Concorde being the only supersonic plane. Just 100 flights for the Tu-144. So not so great. And then you mentioned all of the stuff about, it only was allowed to fly to New York because of air pollution. Only the super rich people could afford to fly on it.
Fun fact.
Yeah.
What do you think it cost average?
The plane to fly?
No, to fly. Like, yeah, a ticket.
Oh, goodness. To like to New York or something?
One-way ticket.
I'm going to go with $10,000.
Ooh, that's pretty good. $12,000 was the average price for a one-way ticket. And I have a fun fact for you.
Wait, if you got round trip, would it help or no?
Probably not.
Yeah, probably.
Fun fact: Fred Finn, a retired business
Freddie Finn,
long-time retired business executive. He flew on 718 flights on the Concorde. It earned him a place in the Guinness Book of World Record as the most supersonic flights by any individual crossing the Atlantic.
Wow.
Even crazier, he did 3 transatlantic flights in a single day to close a deal for whatever business he was involved in. So he flew one way, flew back, needed to come back again, and flew 3 flights because it's only 3 hours. Could you imagine flying across the Atlantic 3 times in one day? So Freddie Finn.
No, good job, Freddie. That is some impressive flying. Not all roses for the Concorde, though, Luke. In the year 2000, when I graduated from high school, I don't remember this at all. Do you?
Yes, I do.
Air France Concorde crashed 60 seconds after taking off from Paris en route to New York. All 109 aboard and 4 on the ground were killed. It was caused by a burst tire that ruptured the fuel tank. And that all led to fire and explosions and bad stuff. Grounded the Concordes for a while. And this really kind of was what marked the decline and end of the Concorde. That took its last flight October 24th of 2003, which is kind of sad.
So the flight specifically that crashed, it was a metallic strip that had fallen from a Continental Airlines DC-10 that had taken off just minutes earlier. And what happened was this little piece of metal punctured the tire, like you said. The tire or the wheel bogey, as they call it, during takeoff. The tire with a Y, because that's how they spell it over in the UK, exploded, and a piece of rubber flew off and hit the gas tank, and it ruptured. The crew shut down engine number 2 in response to the fire warning. They didn't have enough time. The aircraft entered a rapid pitch and then a sudden descent, rolling left and crashing tail low. So it kind of came down on its butt. And it actually crashed into a Hotel Les Monts Les Rallières Balus Hotel in Genesee, Italy, which is right outside of Charles de Gaulle Airport.
Oh my goodness. So as you are talking about all of this stuff, it strikes me that you look in your green shirt with your mustache while talking about planes. You look like you are straight out of Top Gun. Like you could be Goose with his mustache. It is so amazing. Everybody, you have to go to YouTube and see this great mustache.
Get our YouTube views up.
I literally didn't even listen to the last thing you were talking about because I was Googling which one it was that you look like. Oh my goodness. I love it. I have fun facts and I have stats about it. What do you got?
So I have a fun fact and a stat. So I'll go first because I'm talking. So from 1976 to 2003, you mentioned the last flight, over 2.5 million passengers flew on the Concorde. And one of the biggest challenges, you talked about the pollution, but the fuel costs were immense. And think about this. This is an airplane that was designed back in, the 60s and 70s. So you can imagine the interior of these after all those years. I mean, it wasn't as fancy as it used to be. There were far more luxurious first class double-decker airplanes. So their ridership or flyership, whatever you call it, was way down. And the cost of fuel, there were times they said they would fly from Paris to New York or to DC, wherever it was, and they said they'd only be half full, and they lose money whenever they don't have a full flight, like a lot of money. So it was fuel costs, declining need, and eventually the planes became decommissioned. So
that's crazy. So some stats about the plane. Like you said, 100 passengers. Good job, Luke. 40 in the front, 60 in the back. 2.5 tons of cargo. Range was 4,143 miles. Takeoff speed, 250 miles per hour. Cruising speed, around 1,350 miles per hour at 60,000 feet in the air. This was about Mach 2 speed. And so
they said when you looked up, you would see space. Like if you were like in the window, it was black above you because you were like literally on the edge of space.
You could see space above you, and you could see the curvature of the earth below you because you're so high up, which is crazy.
So worth it. If I had 12K and it was still flying, I think that would be pretty cool.
Would you go to space today on like Blue Origin or SpaceX thingy-majigs or anything like that? Virgin Galactic?
Probably not.
See, Michael Strahan's going up there right now on Saturday. Like it's all in
Michael Strahan?
Yeah, it's all in the news. It's
the football player anchor?
Yeah, him.
The guy with the gap in his teeth.
That's the one. Yeah, he's going up.
Him?
I think it's probably some Good Morning America
some publicity
thing.
Stunts kind of thing. I got you.
Exactly. I wouldn't go up there because I think it's going to explode, and I hope not, but I think it is. But my wife says she would, and I don't like it. Landing speed 187 miles per hour, which feels entirely too fast to me. That's very scary. The length is 203 feet and 9 inches sometimes, except when it stretches during flight between like 6 and 10 inches, which
we
is
talked
scary.
about that with the Blackbird, the aerodynamic heating. These things get bigger as they heat up.
Yeah. The wingspan is 83 feet 8 inches, height 37 feet. Fuel capacity. This is stupid. 26,286 gallons. So stupid.
It was essentially a fuel tank with seats because
Yes.
it burned so much fuel per person. The
Fuel
most
consumption?
fuel inefficient airplane I think ever made, they said.
Fuel consumption was 5,638 gallons per hour.
That's so dumb.
And let's see. And then I have some fun facts for you. Would you like those?
Please.
I told you it grew 6 to 8 inches in flight because of the heat. Painted specially, developed white paint to accommodate the changes in heat to dissipate it, to help with the whole process, along with the special metals and alloys used. In November 86, British Airways Concorde flew around the world, covering 28,000 miles in just 29 hours and 59 minutes. The fastest transatlantic flight was 2 hours and 58 minutes and 59 seconds. So that's pretty fast. There are 7 of these spread around from the British Airways fleet: Edinburgh, Filton, Manchester, New York, Seattle, and one at Heathrow in Barbados is where they're all located.
Do you think if you flew in the opposite direction, like from here towards Europe, is that time travel?
It could be. It's getting pretty close.
I mean, think about it. Like it's got to be time
3
travel,
hours. Yeah.
right? I mean, and then you just keep on going. I mean, eventually you would go back in time. Isn't that how like time travel works?
I don't know. I'm not that smart, but it
Just
sure
saying.
feels like it. Converted into today's dollars, Luke, one of these suckers would cost about $200 million, which is more than the F-22 Raptor costs, which doesn't make sense to me. And then I'm going to say 2 more. One, at low speeds, it was super inefficient, right? It could burn 2 tons of fuel just taxiing to the runway. And then last but not least, it flew at such high altitudes, like we discussed, that it would often interrupt the missions of US spy planes. On one occurrence in particular, during the Cold War, pilots of the Concorde asked air traffic control if it could move one of their SR-71s out of the way so that it could finish landing at New York's JFK Airport.
They also said they flew at such a high altitude that they pretty much had unrestricted airspace. Like they could do anything they want because there were no other commercial airlines. And I do have one last fun fact that I was at the bottom of my page. It was the first aircraft ever to be fly-by-wire. And what that means is typically, like when you're in an airplane, you have your steering wheel joystick.
I like what you're doing there. Yeah.
Whatever it's called. But it was a mechanical connection from the pilot to the rudders and all kinds of hydraulic systems. But this was the first time where it was fly-by-wire, meaning that it was an electronic signal. And if you think about it, like that's a lot of trust. Like, what if those electronics fail? You have to have redundancy built in. So the very first aircraft, it was fly-by-wire. And nowadays, I think almost all aircraft, and actually a lot of vehicles nowadays are drive or fly-by-wire, meaning electronics control most of the steering and braking and all that sorts of stuff.
Do we have time for a real quick fun story?
Oh, I'm sure we do.
So the other day, like a week or 2 ago, right before Thanksgiving, I'm like, I'm going to go start up the Corvette because I don't want the battery to die. Makes sense.
We all start up the Corvette every now and then.
Yeah. I open up the door and I'm like, ooh, this doesn't sound like it's good. I start it and it's like, and I'm like, well, crap, that sucks. So the battery's dead because it's always dead because I never drive it because it's Pittsburgh and the roads are terrible. And so I'm like, well, I got to get out. Corvette does not have handles, nor does it have a little lock that you can pull up. But when you close the door, it automatically locks. The battery completely dies. It won't let me out of the car. I'm literally sitting in the car
go out to T-tops
with my wife in another vehicle across from me. And I'm like texting her, you need to unlock the trunk with the spare keys, pull the emergency thing so that the door pops open. I'm FaceTiming her to teach her how to do this from the trunk, all because it's dependent on electricity. And I had none of that. It was stupid. And I was very angry and embarrassed.
Every time I unlock my Corvette, I don't have that problem. So,
I know. Well,
I'm
glad. All right. Well, hopefully everybody enjoyed learning about the Concorde and everything that went along with it. If you have anything you want to tell us about this amazing plane or really anything else, how about you email us at unprofessionalengineering@gmail.com. And until next time,
see ya.